And now it is time for us to transition to our fishbowl. We want to welcome Keith McCandless, the author and founder of Liberating Structures and one of our dear advisors on the New Rules for Work 2023 experiment, to host this fishbowl. Keith, thank you for getting up this morning and coming in with us.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I love working with the two of you. So great. Was that my invitation to take it from there?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Good.
So just actually to set a little context, this part of the program, we're going to combine our conversation about the 2023 experiment with some early data analysis from our academic advisors, Dr. Allen and Sam Dabrowski. I'm sure she's here as well. So Joe will be joining us here on the couch in a minute, but we would love for you to also ask your questions in the chat. So Keith, yes, all yours. Take it away.
Hello, Sam. We'll chat later. We didn't have a chance to talk in advance, so prepare yourself. From the very beginning, Dave and Elise, I've been astounded by the boldness and resolve of launching the experiment. Right? It's a quest for knowledge, for something definitive, or at least a sense of, are we progressing? Are we learning something? And so that a good quest always starts off with companions. So you found each other. I'd like to hear a little bit about how did you find each other, and then what has drawn you into this quest, which is a huge thing, as everyone knows, I think. So how did you find each other and the quest? Like why are you on this quest?
So you actually reached out to me before this all started. I think when the pandemic hit and people were figuring out how to move meetings, facilitation, creativity online, I think you had reached out to set a meeting because I don't know how you came across, but we met for half an hour.
Yeah.
I think you were looking at all different training programs and online facilitators and just getting to know them. And so we had a one-off meeting well before this even started. But then I guess the direct origin of the New Rules for Work came from a study that was released in the spring of 2022.
Yeah.
Right? It was in nature.com. And it was talking about getting back in person if you want to be creative and collaborative. And I had issue with the methodology, and I wrote about it. And I wrote about it to a newsletter that Elise had subscribed to.
Yep.
And I was pretty curmudgeon-y about the whole thing. But to get a reaction, I suppose it worked because you responded and said, in a very nice way, said, hey, instead of complaining about it, which is what I was doing more or less, why don't we do something about it? And that was the seed of what's been a year and a half journey, as you're describing it. What am I missing?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, that original study said that if you wanted to be creative, you had to get back in the room, and the methodology they used wasn't methodology that we use as facilitators. But I happen to know a bunch of handy science folks, and I thought, well, golly, why don't we see if some of them would like to join us and run a new experiment that combines some of what we do as facilitators with real people in real rooms to drive creativity, and then retest, how does the meeting location and the technology impact our results?
Great. So I thought you were the principal investigators, but I think Dave is the chief curmudgeon in this.
And I accepted the challenge. I felt like, okay, I probably should do something about this instead of just complain about it. And so for the first, I don't know, that was that summer. And then we started planning, which was almost a year ago, the symposium, right? The 3-day symposium that really kicked off the experiment. So there was a lot of planning into that, and we didn't actually meet in person until the first experiment sometime
Like in April or May or June or something.
So it was one of those pandemic collaborations. There's a number of them that we probably all met online, and maybe only as recently as a year ago we started meeting in person. But yeah, we did so much of the work for the 3-day symposium last year. That was really the I suppose the public beginning of this, which was to spark a lot of creativity. We had experts, we had academics, authors, practitioners talk about what they had learned, what the research is showing about collaboration, creativity. Then we kicked off the design competition.
Yeah.
So the experiments that we ended up running, there was an A, there was a B. Those were submitted by people who attended the symposium. And we also
tried to crowdsource like really worthy challenges.
Right.
Something we'll talk a lot about how that worked out.
Right. What were the topics of the challenge that we were going to go and take around? We had to have something universal, something global that we could take to different parts of the world, different people, different background, different experiences, and have them collaborate and come up with some sort of creative answer to. So
you gathered more companions. I think of that as you're gathering more companions on the way, and they have tools. So later in this, we're going to talk about some of if you're co-investigators, really, who are the other people with tools? And, Sam and Joe are going to join in the Fishbowl in a minute. And we can take just a breather from talking to you and suggest to everyone who's listening in that chat is there for you to jot questions that you'd like any of the folks, any of the fish in the Fishbowl, anyone being interviewed, and we're going to try to answer them. And there'll actually be time in breakout rooms for you to generate some tougher questions together. And at some point, well, yeah, we'll try to give you a tougher.
Questions are so tiny.
Yeah, don't worry. I actually don't want you to see them. I want you mostly to talk to each other, which you're doing great. So you found some more companions, and typically on a quest, as you drop down underneath what people are saying, there's a lot of confusion and challenges and impossible, barriers to you actually discovering anything. And Dave, you started to mention, some of the complexity of the study, but what were the confusing early challenges that you faced as principal investigators?
I think the first one is up to that point, I'd only read studies, as someone who's a curious practitioner. But going to the other side and actually conducting one, again, we started out questioning a particular methodology and saying, this is not something that we would do with a client or with our team at work, right? What was in that original study. So of course we wanted to do let's do an experiment where we had a half a day, a full day workshop, and really get into the methodologies, the practices that we would use if we were with a client or if we were with a team. And you had to downsize those for academic reasons. I think there are certain studies, there are certain measures, there are certain questions that have history or that have pedigree that you need to bring in so you can kind of connect to past research. So you're tweaking there a little bit. And then there are practicality concerns. So we had to conduct this experiment a certain number of times to get a statistically significant results. And so we weren't going to get enough people to sign up for a half a day workshop, for the to help out science. People had jobs, they had other things to do. So we had to take what we thought was the right methodology
or a workable
better methodology, right? And what we would do from the practical end of the spectrum, we were butting up against, or we had this issue with, on the other end, the academic, and kind of meet in the middle. So I think
it was really hard.
It was hard. A
That's
year
fair.
on, it doesn't seem like, oh yeah, we just did it was an hour, we figured out the hour meeting. But we went through so many revisions. We tested these processes, the different platforms we were using. I think
we'll see them both today, actually.
right?
We have Storms and Mural later on today.
With with one of the processes and one of the platforms, we thought we were going to have to ditch it because we had tested it a couple times and it just wasn't working out. And so we had to, these things led to insights, by the way, a lot of these struggles, as they often do. But yeah, I guess looking back, there were a lot of rough edges to smooth out from, going from the world of the practitioner into actually making it practical for people to participate, but also adhering to some academic guidelines.
A deep bow to both of you to make it through.
Yeah, you've done this before,
To get it through. I've done it a few times and it's hard. And the reason I wanted to interview the two of you, and somebody in the chat said, well, just let's hear about the results. There's this strong desire for a definitive judgment. Well, what works? And we want it crisp and nice and in a beautiful package. And my experience, most of the interesting things, or many of the interesting insights and discoveries don't necessarily come out in the results. They come out as you're doing the work. So that's what I'm hoping to get a flavor for here. So what are the things that you've learned that when Sam and Joe are, going to talk about some of the results, the preliminary results? What are the things that just aren't going to come through? And these could be myths that were busted by you, or, God, I would never do that again in my practice now that I've done this work. What were those kinds of things, discoveries that you made that may not be reflected in the formal academic results? Please tell us.
So I think one of the things that we ended up talking a lot about, that we felt a lot of tension about. So when you do this process, and you can see it in the comments that came at the end, people were like, we didn't have enough time. We felt rushed. We were doing too much surveys. I wasn't quite sure what to do at this one point. Now, if it were a facilitated session, we would smooth all that over. We'd walk in. There were times, for example, when I was leading one of the workshops and they had these 3-minute breakouts, and then they'd split and meet another person for 3 minutes and split and meet another person. And in some groups, they're just like, oh my gosh, that wasn't enough time. We're talking. And in other groups, I would watch people go and they'd talk for about 30, 45 seconds, and then they'd stand there because they were done. Now, had I been facilitating that in a natural way, I would have said, hey, what else? What's going on? Have you talked about this? Or, hey, take it farther. And because we were working to stick to the script, we didn't do any of that.
Yeah, we couldn't improvise.
We just let the process be the process, right? The mural board told people what to do. We set people into a breakout room for 45 minutes. And we hoped to gosh, they came through the other side. Mm-hmm. In the room. We said, okay, 5 minutes, go. Hope to gosh, they came through the other side. And what we found is that every single one of them did.
Yes.
So even as a facilitator, it felt, we're like, oh, the energy's whack. And these people are, I would hate to have to do this to a client. And yet, every time they got results. So as a practitioner, that was sort of revelatory. The things that we do that are so special are maybe not so special.
Yeah. So in taking the process that we use Mural for, that was that was the one that was on the bubble. And we did a lot of revisions on that to get it right. And what we ended up doing is, as Elise mentioned, putting people into their breakout rooms with their teams in a mural board, and we didn't talk to them for 40 minutes. Now, normally, that's not how a facilitated session goes. They would go into a breakout room, they would do whatever it is they were to be done in the breakout room, come back, we'd give them an extra instruction, they'd go in and come back. But there was too much friction with the experiment participants. A lot of them had never used something like Mural before. So we had to make it dead simple to use. And so we ended up putting what the human facilitator would be doing as instructions in the mural board. And there would be a box and there would be instructions, and then they would do the thing. And then there would be a line connecting them to the next set of instructions and the next box where they were going to do the. So yeah, maybe some of the things that we do, the human interaction part in terms of getting a result, everybody who went into that mural board, into that process, they came out on the other side. And so it's, wow, do these things need to be actively facilitated? Or it's a shift on what the facilitator or maybe even the designer was. I think it forces us to think about that.
Well, yeah.
What are you really doing when you're...
So that's interesting. If I was a curmudgeon, I'd say over facilitation is something we need to think about. Over helping. Are we over helping? But what's really interesting is the study forced some innovation that revealed something that probably the study, I don't know what the results are going to say about that, but that's a perfect insight into a delightful insight that maybe only the two of you could see because it repeated itself multiple times, right? Was anybody else there along the entire path and made those kinds of discoveries besides you?
I don't think so. I think you might be about as close as it gets, honestly.
Yeah.
What did you think, Keith? Did you watch us gyrate our way through to...
I wasn't there. I'm an advisor who popped in once in a while. I wasn't there, but I've had similar experiences where if I can get a small group into a room and give them simple guidance on how to generate something, it's beautiful. And I had to get over my desire to overhelp. But that's okay. That's one. And I think just timing wise, this could be a moment in which we give participants in Zoom a chance to talk to each other. So Natalie, are you there for me? And could you make breakout rooms for 3 possible for 5 minutes? And in those 5 minutes, I encourage people in breakout rooms, if somebody doesn't join in and there's only 2 of you, do the best you can. These are the simple rules for the breakout that we just talked about. Come up with the questions that, if answered, could help you make use of the insights that you think. We've just shared a couple, but what do you need to know from these 2? They went on a journey. They made a whole variety of discoveries. What are the questions you have for them? And we'll be back in 5 minutes. And if you could type your questions into chat, that would be the very best thing. So Natalie, are you with me? Maybe I got a note from you wearing a... Okay, great. So Natalie, we don't need the slides. If you can, yeah, good.
Thanks.
So if in chat there's some questions, if you see, I'm gonna miss the answers. Okay. Yeah. So Marta is asking, there's a couple, are the results gonna convince the deciders? I love that question. Where most participants are facilitators themselves. It's always a little harder to bring coals to Newcastle.
Yeah, so the answer to that is that the participants were mixed. So we definitely had facilitators. I know many of you participated yourselves. Thank you so much for your work that way. But we also had people who were engineering teams. We had friends and family. We had administrative assistants. We had folks from all kinds of different walks. We had some people who had never dealt with the tech. We had people who walked in and said, "We never do anything like this ever."
Yeah.
Like, "Oh, wow, sticky notes. These are really cool. We should do more of this in our work." And then we had people who walked in and said, "Well, as facilitators, this is not at all what we do. Our job is to connect, and you should have done this, 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 and 97 other things."
They were all
correct.
facilitators, and that was
they did not like a
why'd
thing
you
we
do this?
did.
It wasn't long enough. I would have done this. And yeah, a lot of feedback from the facilitators.
Yeah. So stats wise, I know Natalie is going to post a link to some docs. I see a lot of questions about that in the chat as well. And so those are our numbers.
Yeah, I would
early
recommend,
Our
Yeah,
early
our
numbers.
take a look at the slides. There's numbers on there. These are all preliminary. And the reason we say preliminary is because we know who were facilitators, we know who were other types of people. And if we were to break this down in various ways, we might see a different set of results than what you'll see on those slides. So that's why Sam is saying these are very preliminary, because for the entire group, this is what we are seeing so far. But if we really want to understand, the experiment and what the things mean, we're going to have to kind of slice and dice and look at things in a few different ways.
So seriously, I'm interested. Is there a category called non-facilitators? Can you just separate them out? That's great. Yeah. I didn't know there were, you could divide the world by non-facilitators and facilitators, but let me just, before I'm sure people are looking at the data now that it's in there. Just a little more chance. Is there anything else as even as people are looking at what got generated in a preliminary way? Elise and Dave, anything else you think just is not going to be represented there out of your experience? I'm looking.
Well, I mean, I think we've written about this a little bit, but originally the question was, does where we are and the tech we use impact our results? And that question just isn't an adequate question, right? Because you have to be very, very clear on what you mean by results, right? So the intentionality mattered most. And what we intended in the design was to get creative output out of every single group in response to the question. And we did that, right? We didn't necessarily get an enjoyable time out for every group. We didn't have equal success in connecting with them as people, having them have a compelling experience, and doing the kinds of things where if a group was in a business context trying to create that result, made them then excited to continue to come back together and work on that result in their next meeting and their next meeting. So in some ways, it's sort of the limitation of like how we read any of the studies. We were really frustrated by the original study because they were doing a lot of evaluation of creativity based on number count, number of ideas generated, therefore, being in the room was more creative. And we're like, that's ridiculous. But in some ways, we have done a similar thing.
Yeah.
We have created a result that we engineered for to control the variables. So for a practitioner and a business standpoint, take away saying, if what you know you need to achieve is results on paper, then you can absolutely do that with strong intentionality. And it really does not matter where you're doing it from. If what you need to build is strong teams,
right,
that is a different question.
Different question with different answers. So there's a lot of it depends, right? It depends what you want.
Yeah, and I think Elise is already kind of sharing. I forget which slide it's on, Sam. If you wanted to pull it up, we could. But
5. I'm guessing what you're about to say.
That we found
I'm gonna guess 5.
Yeah, that we found that the modality, hybrid, face-to-face, and virtual, at least for the entire set of experiments and so forth that were run, didn't really change the results or the outcomes to a great extent. Number of ideas generated was different, but the final product and the creative nature of that, which our colleague Dr. Redder Paulman, who will join us later today, will talk more about, didn't really change by that modality. What did change, though, and Sam, maybe you could talk to this, was how you facilitated, how you framed the work did appear to make some differences, at least in the larger sample. Again, I still think when we slice it and dice it down, we're going to see some interesting things, but other interesting things related to this. But Sam, what would you say about those particular differences or not differences that we saw or didn't see?
Yeah, I mean, I think with any experiment, because the institutional review board process takes some time and it takes some time to set up an experiment, you make all these decisions at the very beginning about the things that might be interesting, and then they're not what you got to. And so when we say preliminary results, I've seen this a lot in chat. The devil's in the details here. I think there's going to be a lot more interesting stuff in the nature of analyzing, who was saying what were they saying, what were the ideas, were the individual ideas creative? But at the beginning, we were like, yeah, conflict, that matters, psychological safety, that matters, totally. Did we see a difference in things like conflict and psychological safety between the processes or between where we were? No, because everybody was at like a 4.3 out of 5 because you met these people an hour ago, and conflict and psychological safety are not things that develop and sustain themselves within an hour. And that's going to have a lot more variance just on, who you got and the personalities in the room during that hour, probably, compared to the variables that we manipulated. I think there's some interesting stuff in the number of ideas generated that we talked about that I think is interesting between the environments. But overall, it's not particularly surprising the lack of differences that we saw.
Yeah. So a couple questions are coming to mind, and I'm seeing some things in chat too. And I'm not sure if everyone can see everybody who's in the fishbowl at the moment can see the questions. I'd like to give the fish a chance to respond to anything they see in the chat, but maybe you can't see it if you're on the couch there. Is the couch therapeutic? Every time I see people on a comfortable couch, I think you're receiving some therapeutic benefit.
No.
We can see the chat.
You can see the chat. Okay. Anything you want to respond to there?
Well, there's a lot here. What was the most fun experience?
I think getting to pick out t-shirts and stickers.
I knew you were going to say the stickers.
I thought the stickers were awesome.
So if you were a participant, you had to change your name. So we couldn't trace anything that you said, any kind of result back to a particular person. And so we needed to come up with names. We used food, animal combinations, and Elise found these great stickers. So when we went in person, if you were lucky enough to be an in-person experiment participant, you got some great sticker combinations with your food and your animal names. And a lot of people, I think that made some of the comments.
Oh yeah.
That were highlighted in the back.
Well, and that was an interesting difference between, so one of the questions, if we're all like potato pig, how do you know which groups were the facilitators and which weren't? And that has to do with, where we happen to do it and what the recruiting process was for that group, right? So some groups were recruited through liberating structures communities, and some were, the engineering department from this university. So we knew whether they knew each other, we knew, that kind of thing. The stickers and the names created one of my other favorite sort of revelations. So in one of those groups of facilitators where we learned we had done everything incorrectly, they talked about how abusive it was that we gave them fake names, because having to refer to each other as like, sushi sloth robbed them of the ability to connect as true humans. Right. And so we had failed. And then the next day, we did an in-person experiment with a group that included business people and university folks, and a lady whose job it was to do therapeutic support for women who had experienced domestic violence.
Right.
And she became, I think, something like dragon fruit duck for the experiment. And when they gave their, presentations, they say, hello, I am dragon fruit duck, and here is our lovely idea. And afterward, her comment was, doing the kinds of work that she does, your identity and your sensitivity about who you are and how you present yourself to the world is always keenly present. And having this moment to just be dragon fruit duck. And really, who cares what dragon fruit duck thinks about creative uses for buildings, right? Was such a relief.
Yeah,
and such a joy.
Being able to put a mask on and being somebody else.
And she's like, I'm going to bring this into my therapy.
Yeah.
The next time we do one of these things with these women who are experiencing domestic violence, who are always concerned about ever showing up, because what if it gets back to their spouses? What if it gets back, right? There are all these issues. We're going to walk in and we're going to be, lemonade lion for the afternoon.
Yeah.
And be okay. So those little tiny things, watching the experts and the people who were not experts experience them radically differently.
Right.
And in very meaningful ways, was really a cool experience.
Going back to the over facilitation part.
Yeah.
There were a lot of little emergent things that came out from these interactions that we had, and just letting people have this experience. That was definitely one of the most meaningful insight, that she just really enjoyed being able to be somebody else and not be her.
Yeah, I guess my experience, anonymity in a group can play a huge role in releasing, being cathartic. And it's interesting that you got a flavor of that. So in a minute, Sam and Joe are going to talk. They haven't really seen each other's work, so we're going to have a chance to hear them share with each other what their take on things were. But one moment before that is usually after there's a discovery, and this is for Elise and Dave primarily. After there's been a discovery, some findings, the ones that can be expressed through analysis and those that can't, it's quite difficult to take those back out, to move from a discovery into sharing them or bringing them into other people's work. What are you thinking about right now about moving from these discoveries into, is it going to convince the person in power to change anything? What are the things that are floating around in your mind about? And I know you've already started to publish a little bit about it, but what's your thinking about that? Taking it back into the world after you've been on this journey. Nobody else has been on the journey. So how are you going to describe this to them? How are you going to share this with them? And it might be too soon for that question, but I'd love to hear what you're thinking.
Well, for me, there are two things that I've already started using when I do interviews and whatnot, because I get interviewed a lot about meeting practice and, what we should do that way. So one of them has to do with location. And the question is, when does it really matter if we get back into the room? I think based on this experience that if you can be incredibly intentional about what you're trying to achieve, so clarity of purpose and outcomes, and have a process for doing it, proximity doesn't matter so much, right? You no longer need to force people to come into an office. That said, we're doing this whole event today because the world is changing rapidly, which means being extra clear on what you need to do and who you're going to do it with, and whether they're going to be real or machines or whatever. Boy, that's a stretch. And if you lack that intentionality, I think getting into the room helps. That we saw people and you guys get to talk about this some, but they seem to enjoy it better. And the interaction was just more natural. Like, I love getting to sit here and interrupt these guys. And have a weird newness there,
We love
right?
it.
And so, yeah,
Yeah.
see, awesome. And then the other one we'll talk about this afternoon, the second major takeaway is that the framing matters. And so we've been doing a lot of thinking about framing and how to apply that.
I think that's actually it's the framing part, and that is after what for us is going to be a lunch break and talking with Ronnie. That's actually, for me, it's come out more in some of the discussions we had in the lead up for this. And, we went into the experiment thinking, oh, we need to frame this up in this particular way in order to get creative results. And I think we've been in the initial analysis looking at, well, how many ideas were generated? Were they creative or not? And I think only recently have I started to piece together how the framing, the explicit framing, but then also the implicit framing, I think maybe the academic word is priming.
Yeah, priming.
What we bring in, whether we've been given a brief and told what the issue is or what the solution needs to be, or we're just bringing it in based on our experience, who we are, how we were raised, the things we're interested in, make their way into a solution. And for me, that's really, really interesting. And what can you do with that if you're leading a team, doing something big or small? How you pose the question and take into account who's in the room and what they're going to bring into it is going to impact the outcome. And keeping with our facilitator, non-facilitator theme, when we get to those, the creative or the qualitative aspects of some of the responses to our experiment, you're going to see some facilitators as a cohort. They have a unique approach. We spotted it because being facilitators ourselves, we noticed, this is something maybe unique to a facilitator. But looking at the outcomes to the experiment question, so there were so many inputs that I wasn't initially considering made their way in so many of the inputs from the people, their experience made their way into the output, the answers to the experiment prompt. So that's fascinating.
I like to call framing, I have a way of describing it, and maybe it's relevant here, that you need precision and ambiguity together as much as you can. So people need to know what's purposeful about it, but that there are many right answers. It's ambiguous. The way you answer this is wide open. And can you do that? Maybe it helps reduce the implicit things that people think you want as answers, but you got to try. So I'd love to hear Sam and Joe try to describe what they found and how they found what they discovered, what they're starting to see, and just talk to each other as if we aren't here. Like, hey, if you can.
We will filter.
We can certainly do that, Keith. We can ignore you quite well.
Beautiful.
I do. I'm gonna admit something. I have a bad habit of doing this when I'm virtual in a hybrid meeting and have two screens. Someone asked in chat, did you control for culture in any way? And I was like, oh, that's an interesting question. I didn't look at that. And so I totally just pulled the data back up. So this just in. So I think that there's probably more detailed information, but one piece of information we had was the entire group from the United States, or were there from some people who were from outside of the United States? And we're about 50-50 split. It looks like the groups that were all from the United States rated their own creativity as a little bit higher than the groups that were mixed. So there's a lot of interesting things there so take a second and think about your assumptions about why that might be happening. Now, what if I tell you, okay, that's all fine and dandy, but of the 12 groups that had any participants from outside of the United States, 11 of them were fully virtual meetings. So these were systematically different in some way. And so I know it's very frustrating when we get to all of this and Joe and I are going to say to each other, I wish we had more data. I wish we had more data. But the truth is that when you want to look at these differences on all these different dimensions, that's a big limitation.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned slicing and dicing, and as much as I like that idea, there's going to be a limit there, right? Because our hope was that we would get quite a few more experiments run, quite a few more sessions than we ended up with, right? And so there'll be a limit, right? As we start to think about the subgroups, okay, we have international participants, we have US-based participants, we can make a comparison there, sure. But what if we wanted to know Europe versus Asia versus South America versus North America? Probably can't get that narrow. And that's partly because the sample doesn't include people from all those places at the same level, right? We don't have an equal group in each of these different places. And if we carve it up that many ways, we don't have the statistical power to test the relationships. And that's just how well can we actually detect the differences that may actually exist between these kinds of groups. So that's one of the challenges. I think for me, in looking at the data, and so Sam looked at mostly the numbers on the surveys on the and the facilitator form and so forth. I and my team looked at the qualitative responses, not the actual meeting videos, because that's going to take a lot longer to code and so forth, which I'm excited about because I think there'll be some interesting things there. But just on the, hey, what did you think about the experience? Or, did you feel like you were comfortable in this environment as you were facilitating and so forth? And what we found was that there was kind of a bifurcation of the data, a bimodal distribution of the data. Some people really felt comfortable and felt like they could really do what they wanted to do, communicate how they wanted to communicate, and so on. And the other half felt like they were not. They were constrained. That the requirements of the facilitation process that was set forth constrained them in ways that they were uncomfortable with, right? And I think that could be, facilitator differences, right? It also kind of speaks to the issues that we run into whenever we're doing an experiment, right? This balance of control versus realism, right? So we want to have as much control as possible so that we can say this session was just like this session, which was just like this session, and say, okay, the only difference was we had different people or we had different modalities. So then we know whatever we've manipulated is causing the difference. And so that meant that people were a little more, some were more comfortable than others in that process. So.
Joe, we were talking the other day about the lack of research on individual differences in meetings.
Yeah.
Mostly because you haven't done it yet. And you do all the research in meetings. And so I don't know. I'm thinking, like, what do you think, especially because I know there's, a lot of facilitators here today, like, what should facilitators be thinking about the fact that two different people can show up to the same meeting that I have beautifully facilitated and experience it in completely different ways? And that's going to be for an astronomical number of reasons, ranging from their stable traits to how they woke up this morning and what their last meeting was like. So, like, what are some of the things that we as facilitators need to be considering from an individual differences perspective?
Yeah, there is some research in meeting science and in facilitation around individual differences, but not as much as there probably should be. I think we were talking about this, Sam. I've been reticent to go down that path because I had a bad experience with personality research. So I was like, well, you know what? I'm not going to do it. And so and because there's so few meeting scientists that are digging into this, historically speaking, there's more now. The COVID and other things kind of inspired a whole new generation of researchers around meetings and collaboration. And so we're seeing a lot more research now than ever before. But that means that the answer to your question is still, from a scientific perspective, not completely known, right? But I will say this, after our conversation, I don't know if it was because I was paying attention or I decided to start paying, not ignoring these requests. I had 4 different people, 2 PhD researchers at other institutions and 2 students, one at another institution and one at my own institution, come to me and ask about doing analyses around gender, around culture, around personality factors, around recent events in a person's life, basically getting into the individual differences concepts and how that will affect the way people interact in a lightly facilitated versus a heavily facilitated session or meeting. And so those are questions that we need to explore. And we know just from basic science research about personality and so forth that we are going to see differences in the way people interact and react to each other and to facilitation. So we can make some pretty important hypotheses, but to really know the truth about those, we probably still need to do more work.
Well, I'm just, not to interject too much, but we
Yeah.
have some of that data, right?
Yeah,
So
we do.
one of the reasons we talk about this being preliminary analysis is in the survey, we collected some data about networking preferences based on Michael Arena's work. So those of you who haven't gone back and watched Michael Arena's talk from last year, you should do that.
Yeah.
But there are ways in which people like to network. And we did see when we ran the experiments, while we have average numbers of ideas and average ratings and whatnot, there were some sessions where somebody would whip out 20 creative ideas and somebody else would sit next to them with their arms crossed and do one.
Right.
And say, done.
Yep.
That's it.
Problem solved.
Right. So those kinds of things, when we're able to look at the data and say, okay, this survey and that participant who behaved in that way, can we connect those things up? We're not there yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Sam, I kind of did this overview of we don't know a lot. From your perspective, whether it be from this data or from other data, what do you think would be some, low-hanging fruit, as it were, that we should be exploring next around this individual difference framing, in meetings?
So there's two things that I'm very curious to look at. One, and I sort of said them, but one is the individual differences from, yes, he does. One is the individual differences of who am I as a person? And one is the individual differences of who am I today and what was I expecting out of this meeting today? So I am in my job kind of a half researcher, half facilitator, which is from two completely different types of training. I know lots of people on the line have those two experiences. The other day I was facilitating a session. We had meeting after meeting of unfacilitated meetings. Of people coming up with random ideas. And I was like, all right, I'm going to write down a bunch of these ideas and we're going to do an actual facilitated session where we can look at the things that we've written down and go to Mural and vote on them and organize them and say, how do we organize our thoughts? But I was pulling together a bunch of people's thoughts that had been completely incoherent from meetings for several weeks. And afterwards, someone sent a long email saying, thanks for the session. It lacked a clear experimental design approach. And here's how I think you should take all of the different scenarios that you shared with me and groupings to kind of make this much more academic. And I was like, cool, if you look at my skills, number one is experimental design. So who are we today and how are we ready for this meeting? And what is I would want to look at, from the research on facilitation standpoint, what's the framing that a facilitator can do in the first 3 to 5 minutes of a session that gets this group ready for this session today? And I think that's an experiment that could probably be done more quickly because you don't need a 4-hour scenario to test out the 3 minutes of framing at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that would be really, really interesting and a great first step that I don't know if we'll explore that specifically in the very near future or what, but yeah.
Well, someone just said in chat, how invested am I in the topic? And also, how much other work am I doing in this area? I brought together a bunch of people the other day. Some of them were there because they were the ones available for the meeting. Some of them, this is 50% of their job is to think about this problem. And then I just framed it in a new way. And so we talk about teams as this thing that's stable over time, but my teams change every time I log on to a new meeting. How do you account for that?
And that's something we're toying with. Practical applications of these studies' implications. Teams are forming, disbanding faster than ever. You to your point, every time you log in, there's a new team
Mhm.
member there or somebody who's gone.
Yeah, dynamic team composition is a huge issue and a growing issue because so many organizations have different rules and policies about how
Yeah.
people interact and how people collaborate, right? And because of that, it does create a different team environment nearly every time you meet with the same team. And so the way we frame what we're trying to do, the way we build the scaffolding around a meeting, which is, yes, is the framing, but also other things, will dramatically impact the way that team with the new people and with the people not there that would normally chime in on with their idea or whatever, that will dramatically affect how that team moves forward and whether it moves forward in a way that is goal centric versus kind of not centered on much of anything.
So I think that makes it like, Sam, if you want to talk about the one numerically interesting piece of data that we had, it kind of speaks to some environmental things you can do to impact behavior.
Yeah, for sure. So, and I'm gonna, I think, explain it from the number standpoint and then hand it back over to you guys to talk about this scritch scratch feeling that was in the room. So reminder, the experimental design, we had these two processes, A and B, and then we had teams that were either fully virtual, they were hybrid, they were face-to-face. Overall, we saw that, I'm looking at slide 4, that process B, they generated a lot more ideas. This is nothing to do with the quality of these ideas, how different these ideas were from each other, just number of things that they wrote down. They wrote down more in process B. Well, what's the difference? There's a big difference between process A and B, but one of them is that process B was 2 minutes longer. And then there's this other interesting thing where process B creates more ideas than process A across the board. But you also see that the more people you have in the room, the more process B actually helps with generating ideas. So that the most ideas get generated when you're face to face and in process B. And what the facilitators can say more about is that they noticed a lull after 3 minutes. People stopped writing down ideas. They kind of sat there for a minute. And then around minute 4, things picked up. Well, if you're online, did you go leave and go get coffee, go to the bathroom or something? Versus you're in the room, oh, we're still working. Let me write down some more ideas. You're getting that more social influence, social pressure. So that's the one big difference we saw. Elise, Dave, what can you tell us more about this kind of scritch scratch effect that you found? Because I think this is super cool.
Yeah, no, it was super clear. Like, you'd have somebody, they'd be sitting back with their pen, and then you'd get the scritchy, scratchy slap going on next to them, right? Scritchy, scratchy slap, scritchy, scratchy slap. And they'd look up and they're like, oh, and then well, okay, I guess, housing,
Right.
they'd add one more thing on there. So if Alex and Mark are on the line, how do you build scritchy, scratchy slap into your software? Like, that would be the question. Like, can we get that social dynamic and that peer pressure thing in an automated online thing? But we weren't able to replicate it in the
Almost like
virtual
when
ones.
people are typing.
Well, yeah,
you
can you do the click clack?
You hear the click clack or something that
Right, like,
that would
I
provide
think
the audible.
when we would remind people how much time was left too, or give them a little.
But we didn't. Oh, you mean, well, yeah.
We can you could nudge people for more ideas.
Yeah.
We noticed that after 1 minute left, people would sometimes pick up the pen again and oh, I've got a few more when they're noticing that other.
Right, because in the room we were able to say it, but online they had timers that showed them. So they knew there was 1 minute left the whole time.
Yeah.
But there was not like the whole 1 minute left, hello, what you doing? Kind of implication of saying it out loud.
The other thing I'll add is the difference, just to bring this into the bowl between A and B, because we've been talking about intentionality and how important intentionality is to the process. Right before those ideation sessions, I think there were activities. There were we'll call them groups, but in A there was a one-on-one conversation just about, oh, what do you think about this experiment? And in B there was a group session, so you would meet with your small group and you would talk about who are we designing for. So it seemed like there was much more intentionality in B. And even though there was more time, I'd be interested to see if we adjusted for time, would the intentionality of that conversation in B, and maybe the constraints or the specificity you have coming out of it, give you more of a foundation to create more ideas for.
We'll have to check that because we haven't looked at the video. So we don't know if they actually
Yeah.
did that. And when you come to the end, all the ideas, well, we'll talk about this
Yeah.
some more. But it's unclear that there was additional creativity incentivized by that moment. So
Yeah, purely quantitatively.
quantitatively,
Right, and-
yes, but
and-
qualitatively,
And I'm gonna mess up the words, Joe, if you know what they're supposed to be, tell me. But looking at from idea to idea, was there more radical creativity that these ideas are completely different from each other? Or in process B, were they more iterative? So you might have had 10 ideas that were all basically the same thing, but slight variations from each other. Is also worth looking into.
Yeah, and I think you'll be talking about some of that later today with Ronnie about what were the ultimate outcomes from the groups and how similar or different were they from from each other, and what were some of the unique ideas that came out. I think what you're kind of getting at there, Sam, is also the individual level ideas, and how are those look different. And even though we don't know the names, we know this line is this person's data, we know this line is this person's data, we can say, okay, this person generated 25 things, this person generated 5 things. What does that mean? Were they distracted? Was it an online situation where they might have been distracted by things that were going on their computer as well? Or was this, what we can speculate, but we can also kind of figure that out to some degree with the data when we align that information up. So.
There was a question, I think it was Andreas, maybe scrolling back up, asking about why we didn't do anything qualitatively.
It's a yet thing. It's right. That is our answer. So I think this was always intended to be mixed methods, but
Yes.
quantitative data analysis is far faster, particularly when you're looking at survey data from only 26 teams. Writing the code for that is not that hard.
Yeah.
So I think it's just where we're at. This is why the results are preliminary.
Yeah, I mean, the intent is to qualitatively analyze the videos, right? And there's more qualitative and less qualitative approaches that we could take to that, right? We can actually take the transcripts and look at some of the dynamics that are going on there from a thematic analysis perspective. There's also things that I do with my team is coding each of the different statements and utterances made by each person and seeing what those are and what they look like and compared to a standardized coding scheme, and then connecting those to maybe some numerics and some other things. So those are things that we plan to do. The challenge though with that is it's very time consuming and therefore it's very costly, right? Because it takes a new coder between 4 and 6 hours just to code a 130-minute meeting, right? And so to do that, I mean, we didn't have that many sessions, but you just do the math. That's
Right.
a lot of time, and that means that person is going to be doing that and not something else, right?
Yeah, and then we have breakout rooms.
yeah.
Yeah, and then we have breakout
So-
rooms that also need to be coded as well. So the nice thing about this is that this effort, even though we didn't have quite as many participants, sessions as we might have liked, we still have a lot of data.
Mhm.
And to get even just those 26 sessions coded is going to take a lot of effort. But once we do that, there'll be a whole set of qualitative types of analyses and findings that we can share. I don't know what we haven't really discussed what the plan is for doing that or how we might approach that, or where folks that are participating today or in the future might want to be involved in that process as well. But those are some things that we planned to do from the beginning, and just we haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah.
So one of the things I think is especially interesting in that data set is that in both processes and in all settings, the creation of the final, here is our idea for solving this problem, was done by small groups in a 14-minute breakout.
Yep.
So that means we have in our data set video for 71 14-minute meetings.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That can be compared. So if somebody here is like super jazzy keen on doing some video analysis and likes to get their ethical IRB certification stuff in play, you give us a shout out because we'd love to hook you up.
So back to Dave and Elise for a minute. I want the answer to this question. if somebody came, what if somebody came to you and said, I want to do this, what would just thrill you if somebody came to you and said, now, well, this is what I want to help you do. I want to help you do almost anything, like as a next step. What would you hope someone would come and offer to help you with now that you've done this work? And it might work for Sam and Joe too, but particularly the two of you, the principal investigators. What's your dream offer?
Well, I can answer this one for me, and then maybe you can, because Dave and I haven't talked about this together much.
Yeah, we've been focusing on kind of
Like, dear
bringing
God,
this
let's
to a
get here.
point, right?
Yeah.
But well, yeah, go ahead.
So, so for my part, my company's Lucid Meetings. We started in 2010, and we did a lot of interaction at a very light level with the academic world. And when you and I were at the meeting Moonshot at Stanford in 2009,
Yeah.
they're talking about how do we fix meetings, right, in the world. And I'm like, yeah, you don't fix meetings, but you can definitely innovate. And at that time, I put out a vision. I was like, the Moonshot should be that we create an innovation lab,
Yeah.
right, that is dedicated to doing joint research between practitioners and academics, because there are things that we can do together. We can move faster than you can. Right? We can push and we can test in ways that the academic process then needs more time to come back on. But if what we're doing and pushing in the innovation landscape then creates data, then helps solidify the questions, then helps create the cohorts. We got 23 groups to run this meeting with no funding. Out of the kindness of your hearts, thank you, God and peoples who came and experimented with us, right? So that's amazing. But what would happen should we be able to combine our efforts in a funded way?
Yeah.
And what would happen if we could create that place and not only do the experiments, but then also bring leadership teams in to experience those things themselves? Because the change in companies comes when the leaders believe that the change is possible, and they believe it after they've experienced it.
Yeah.
So you need the data, and you need the opportunity to connect them with things in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and one thing I would add there to that is that yes, academics are notoriously slow at doing their research, but it's partly the system.
It wasn't a slam.
Right. Partly the system. We have to go to IRB. We have to go through, institutional review board. We have to go through other processes. So some of that can never go away.
Right.
But I have learned that institutions and researchers speed up.
Oh, do they?
Yes. When there are resources. And so the reality is, something like that I think is a wonderful idea. And if something like that were to emerge and there were actual, funds flow to the innovators, to the practitioners, to the academics and so forth, then people would move faster, right? And be able to, fund research assistants or fund, academic time and practitioner time to do these kinds of things. And then the innovation cycle would be shortened, as opposed to, what we've done this time, again, because we're working on the goodwill of wonderful people, many people that have joined us today, but also others. That takes a lot longer to achieve outcomes, which is why I'm like, oh, it's going to take me 150 hours of somebody's time to code all these videos. How am I going to do that? Right? How am I going to get people to volunteer to do that?
Well, and I don't think one of the things we were not able to test with, and it's why after the break, we're going to be switching our attention to talking about AI. That changes the game.
It does.
That came up.
That came up right in the middle as we were doing these
doing our
experiments.
IRB. The review process for the ethical review. So
institutional review board, it's our ethical review board, for verifying that we're not going to do something weird to participants.
AI exploded. We said, oh, how can we get
AI into this?
We get AI into this. Like, no, we'd have to go all the way. We'd have to get to the back of the line.
Yeah.
And then go through this whole thing again.
Yep.
I wanted to jump in and flip. I don't know if this is a flip on this question, but I love making these things practical. We started getting into this in this is going to come up in our conversation with Ronnie around framing and the Tesseract. I love taking these conversations that we've had, the research. We've been having conversations with other academics, thought leaders, authors, in an intent to make it practical. If somebody came in and said, we want to bring you in-house and test some of these things in a very practical manner, at the very tip of the spear, if maybe I heard you describe what we've done, even though we don't have enough runs of the experiment, we have a lot of data to maybe go and get a grant and get some funding for the bigger version of this.
Sure.
And that way it's a beta. And doing this in an environment where we can move faster and test different things. I think, Keith, that would be an in-house, I don't know if this consultant / researcher, where we're taking these things that we're finding, these tools that we're developing from talking with the Joes, with the Ronnies, with the Hals, with the Matts, and then bringing them in to an organization where we've got some scale. Say, oh, we tried this thing. We're seeing this, and then maybe tying it to research.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, okay. Yeah. If we did this, then we can get some a study out of it. But that would be a wonderful invitation to receive.
Yeah. It seems complementary to what Elise mentioned and Joe elaborated on. So yeah, it's a beautiful, well, what you've done, I think we're closing momentarily. I just want to thank you so much for leading, guiding, making it happen, analyzing, sticking with it through a pretty rough patch. Truly a quest, a worthy quest, where I'm in awe of you, of all of you, the work you're doing. So thank you for that. And I think we've used the time allotted. Elise, is that accurate? We're about to take a break.
Yeah, we so totally have. Pretty much, yeah. Thank you, everybody, so much for this. Stick around. We're gonna be smart though, and stand up and go get some water and blink our eyes and stuff before we hear from Dave and Helen about AI and then play with AI with Alex. Sam, thank you so much for joining us and doing all of that early data crunching. That was amazing. And thank you, Keith, for thank you, Keith, for hosting us.
My pleasure. Thank you.